You have people that always fearmonger about China, despite the fact that China has one military base compared to our 800 to 900, and so it's like these kind of things you got to keep in consideration. The fact that they actually did a great job reducing the amount of poverty they have in China, while our life expectancy in our country continue to drop, and this is why you see this shift in focus toward fighting this new Cold War in China. And that's why, as an anti-imperialist, I was very hesitant towards praising Joe Biden, because the Biden administration was very open about the fact that one of the reasons why they want to scale down the war in Iraq, I say scale down because they're still going to have, covert operations, over-the-air operations, which mean they're going to bomb people in Afghanistan. So I don't like using the term end the war because they're not really doing that. But I will use the term scale it down because they are scaling down the war in Afghanistan. And they plan on using this to fight the Cold War in China and Russia. And they was pretty open about this. And one big thing that Tony Blinken was saying was that we need to rethink our overall strategy. And that was what Afghanistan was. It wasn't a lesson of the United States drifting towards anti-imperialism. Actually, there's more evidence to the contrary that the United States is doubling down on imperialism and invading other countries. And I want to get Karim thoughts on this, because I know I checked out that video that you sent me with, because I really want to get Ronnie and Kalik on the show eventually, because they were talking about how China did a great job reducing poverty in their Belt and Road initiative. So you guys are out of Hong Kong, and I want to take this opportunity to learn from Karim and Peter on this topic. So I'm gonna pass it to Karim first. I know we checked out the interview they did when they're talking about China reducing poverty and their economic model and the United States response to that. So I want to toss it to you. What's your thoughts? Do you have anything you want to break down regarding the Cold War in China?
So I think what is very important for us to understand is that historically, the countries that have been demonized by the United States or the European empires, former empires, are countries that are usually a threat to capital. Okay, whether it's Soviet Union, Cuba, and in this case China, is that we always need to be, especially as leftists, very wary of the countries that are criticized the most by our governments, and in this case, the United States. China is, whatever you think about the political system or whatever, I think there is not a country that compares to the damage and the destruction that right now comes from the United States and formerly the colonial empires. Okay, so I don't care right now about the Chinese government or the way they are ruling their country. What I care about is that they are taking care of the poor, that they are pulling people out of poverty, they're increasing healthcare, education, and so forth. While in the United States, I see the opposite happening, and I see in Europe we are slowly getting into that neoliberal trend of complete destruction of the middle class as well. So what China is doing to its own population, in a sense, China is also doing to populations around the world. China has a very different cultural heritage, thousands of years of cultural heritage, very different from the European and in particular the Northwestern Protestant kind of European culture of pure domination, exploitation, and so forth. This is also what developed the system of capitalism. Predatory capitalism came out of colonialism, expansion, domination, exploitation. And China is doing to the rest of the world a bit what it's doing to itself. It's pulling people out of poverty. It's doing the same in Africa. It's doing the same in Southeast Asia. In fact, and this is the interesting thing about China, that's why we as leftists need to pay attention. China is the first major superpower in the world that supports socialist governments. I mean, this is so extremely important for us to understand. Like, this is a major power in the world that supports socialist governments around the world and that supports anti-imperialist movements. And not only that, it also helps other countries like in Africa, but also in Latin America, to build infrastructure, to build up their country without demanding that you become their system of politics, that you put elites in place that work for China. It's a very different system. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that we as leftists, for the first time, have the chance to have a hegemonic power on our side, you know? And instead that we are going to jump on the boat with the imperialists and people like Vaz, you know, and that we are going to like say that China is imperialist and a danger, and that's why the United States so-called should stay in Afghanistan, which is just disgusting. Instead of doing that, we must see one of the greatest chances we have for the first time in history, that we have a major power that actually supports leftist, anti-imperialist movements. And it's also important because it's a country that has suffered under colonialism, century of humiliation, and it's the first real non-white, non-Caucasian contender on the world stage for power. You know what I mean? So I think this is very crucial for us to understand when every time you hear that despicable propaganda, that anti-China propaganda in the media, you know, and a lot of so-called leftists seem to be falling for that. While you live a terrible marginalized position in your own empire, in your own country. United States has 5% of the global population, but 25% of the prison population, of which are most non-whites. So so every time you hear that propaganda from the West, oh, what is China is doing to its minorities? No, first look at yourself, okay? Then you can complain about someone else. Nick, yeah?
Yeah, I'm always deeply, and this is kind of how I grew up. I was explained before how I was radicalized during the George W. Bush administration. And I don't know how anyone can see the United States government constantly lie and then have any trust towards them. So whenever I see, well, this is my mindset now that I learned as I grew and became more informed leftist. Like whenever I see the United States State Department push extreme propaganda against a country, I'm immediately skeptical of that. And this is going on with China. You got a lot of these same people, and like Vaz, as you say, for example, they will always say stuff like, "Oh, China is an imperialist nation." And I want to get you guys thoughts on this as well. And I love to get Peter and Assal's thought on this, because I was looking into this and I wanted to educate myself, make sure I can speak on this. And looking into this accusation that China is like this imperialist nation is kind of deeply rooted in racism in a way, because whenever the United States and whenever the West invest into a country, whether the people want to do it or not, we are seen as liberators of sorts. This is kind of the Western chauvinism mentality. But you have, I think, like 30 out of the 40 African countries that was accepting help from China. And a lot of these countries, they know what they're doing. They understand the investment. A lot of these countries in Africa, they was victims of imperialism for decades and decades and decades. So I think they are able to recognize whether this deal is worthwhile or not. And then you also have people that was flowing the idea, oh, you have China putting all these countries into debt slavery. Well, for one, them actually helping building infrastructure in other countries is so important for those countries in order to build and advance their revenue. But it also ignores the fact that you had China that was forgiving a ton of debt. They forgave a ton of debt in Ethiopia. So what exactly would be the end game that you would criticize and that you would call imperialism? So I would love to get you guys thoughts on it, because I gave this a lot of thought, and I wanted to make sure that I'm being as fair as possible. I just feel like calling China an imperialist country because the Belt and Road Initiative that is 100% helping third world countries and not putting them in debt. I think that just kind of, if you say that, you just rob the word imperialism of all its meaning. You have imperialism is all about domination, all about imposing your culture and stealing resources, and what I see what China doing. And a lot of these developing countries, I like to say, I hated the term third world country. Like I'm not calling a country a third world country if they offer healthcare and we don't, for example. So let's use the term developing country. I see nothing but positives for them right now. You just have a lot of people in the West that just want to fearmonger, even though U.S. imperialism, we implement sanctions on countries that starve their population. So it's like, how can we trying to pretend that what China is doing is anywhere close to the imperialism we are. But obviously, I still got a lot of growth on this issue, but I try to approach it in a lot of different angles. But I'm very interested, and I want to get Peter in here. I'll start with him. We talked to Assal and Karim. But I do want to bring up the opposing argument. And that's kind of me thinking it out to myself. Like, is China imperialist? Is the Belt and Road Initiative a new form of imperialism? I kind of gave my thoughts, but I want to get your guys' thoughts on that as well, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could start first taking a page out of Jesus's book and not try to pull the mote out of our neighbor's eye when we've got a plank in our own eye. That would be a good start if we were a Christian country, but I think that's pretty obviously we're not. But I think to help people in the West, especially leftists in the West, to understand China, but also other countries that are ruled by a communist party, is to understand, like, for people in the West, what is the thing that drives you to the left? Like, the main problems we face domestically in rich northern, Western core countries are inequality and worker exploitation. So for them, like, the kind of main focus of leftism is ending those problems. But if you're someone drawn to the left, 100 years ago, in China or India or all sorts of countries in West Asia, Africa, et cetera, Latin America, you have an additional problem. You've got the empire's boot on your neck. If you try to use your own resources to develop your own country, you're going to get literally murdered by the empire. So that's the reality that people in the global South, the majority of the world, that's the reality that they were facing. So people that were attracted to communism, and basically it was like everyone who is educated, even people who weren't educated but were interested and tried to learn on their own, they were attracted to communism, to communist ideology, to Marxism, because it seemed to them the only way that they could possibly develop and become strong enough that they could get the boot off their neck, so that they could actually develop, so that they could use their own resources and their national wealth for their own people, rather than just give it away to rich people in the West or the North, right? So when you look at it like that, you have to understand, like, the first thing a country in the global South that is under the domination of the empire has to do is to strengthen. You have to get your economy to the point where you can no longer be crushed by sanctions. Right now, most countries in the world, if you're cut off from economic inputs from the global North, from the core countries, you can just be absolutely crushed. You look at North Korea, how difficult the situation is for people there, because they cannot produce everything that you need to produce in order to provide your citizens with the resources that they need. More importantly than that, even if your economy is not capable of producing all of the kind of top of the line, most technologically advanced products in the economy, that also affects your military power, because almost everything, from semiconductors to aerospace, has a military use. And you don't have to think of it in terms of offensive military power. I'm just talking about defensive military power. So if you look at what China's strategy was, after the revolution, they had the Soviet Union to follow. Great example of a poor country that industrialized extremely rapidly, far more rapidly than anyone in the ruling class of the northern countries, the global North countries, thought they would be able to do. And they actually started to get really worried, because they thought that system would be very sclerotic and it wouldn't be able to pull off industrialization. But in fact, it did very successfully, very quickly. So they followed the Soviet model. They had Soviet advisors. They got technology transfer from the Soviet Union to start building factories, power plants, roads, bridges, railway networks, et cetera, et cetera. That was the basic thing that they needed at that time. Then when it came to the point where they had industrialized fairly successfully, they still couldn't catch up with the northern countries for a number of reasons. First, the northern countries were able to exploit the rest of the world, getting natural resources from the rest of the world at very low costs. And then that surplus then allows them to have much more investment in basic research, science, R&D, et cetera, so that they can increase their technological lead. So by the 70s, 80s, they're thinking, okay, we need to introduce some sort of modification to our top-down structure so that we can attempt to catch up in these other areas. The thing is, by 1990, basically when the USSR is collapsing, China basically has two choices. So you can either attempt to continue down the socialist road, have a state-driven command economy, or you can attempt to marketize. Now, what are the costs and benefits of these two paths? If you, by 1990, when the USSR is gone, if you want to go down the socialist road and say we're going to still be a top-down command economy, I think the most likely outcome of that would have been the global North countries led by the US saying, oh my God, look at this backwards anachronistic country. They are the enemy. They are the new evil empire. They are, persecuting Christians and killing babies and torturing puppies, whatever you guys need to think that they are super evil and to create them or to put them in the position the USSR had been in. And then we'll try to crush them however we can. So that means sanctions. That means fomenting breakaway regions. That means just causing whatever problems you can possibly cause to destroy them and impoverish them. And their propaganda campaign would probably have been very successful, just as successful as it was against the USSR. Other option, we'll open up. We'll say, okay, foreign capitalists, come in here, build factories, exploit the hell out of our workers, treat them like garbage. You'll love to come here, not just because wages are low. That's only one part, but you can get low wages all over the world. Why would you want to come to China? Because they had already industrialized using top-down command economy methods to the point where they had excellent infrastructure and the population was generally much better educated and trained in factory work than poor countries that didn't have that kind of socialist revolution, that kind of top-down industrialization. So that was basically the deal that they made. Come in, invest here, we'll get technology transfer that way, and we'll get the hard currency that we need to be able to buy the latest productive equipment, train our people, invest in R&D, et cetera, et cetera. So that's essentially what they did. And a lot of people in the Western left look at that and say, well, I don't like that. That's immoral. You're allowing your people to be exploited. And I agree on that point. I mean, I can't argue with the morality there. But my question to them then is, what is the better option that they had? So that was basically the option that they took. And I think the real kind of mask off moment when we can actually, legitimately make a judgment about the moral correctness or incorrectness of the Chinese government's policies will be when China develops to the point where they can no longer be crushed by cutting off inputs, economic inputs from the rest of the world. We already saw a Chinese company when they were cut off from semiconductor inputs was basically destroyed. So once they get to that stage where they can actually produce everything that they need to produce and they don't have to worry about sanctions destroying their country, their economy, then that'll be the point where it's like, okay, what is the true nature of the Chinese government? But until then, you have to realize the position that China and lots of other countries in the global south are in, how easily they can be crushed and how important it is to develop your economy to the point where you don't have to worry so much about the empire or the global north destroying you.
That's such a great breakdown, Peter. I want to pass it to Assal, and then we can get Karim thoughts and Josanna from there. But Assal, you got anything you want to add?
Well, I think I would just slightly simplify what Peter is basically saying, which is as long as we are an empire, we invite anybody else to be an empire. That's basically what it is, right? The problem with the rhetoric in the United States is that we're not mad that we're not mad about empire. We're mad about anybody trying to compete with us, period. That's the issue. The issue is not imperialism. The issue is not democracy. The issue is not human rights. We love those catchphrases, use them all the time, completely ignoring our own human rights abuses, drone attacking people as we pretend like we're ending wars, killing civilians. It's totally fine. We do these things every single day, the things we do to our own population. You can talk about imprisonment. You could talk about arms sales to war criminals. I mean, the list will go on and on and on to disprove that we care anything about any of the things that we say we care about. The issue is very simple. We don't want anybody competing with us. The problem with that is when you are an empire, you invite competition. That's essentially what Peter was explaining, right? You put other countries in a position when you have the power to exploit them, to suppress them, unless they fall in line, you force them to compete with you. Now, what's the alternative? This would be my own very simple explanation. We created the idea of internationalism as an alternative to empire. The problem was we never implemented it. We just used international bodies as tools of empire. That's why the US will boast of the United Nations when they want to go to war with Iraq, but then will veto anything that has to do with saying lifting an embargo on Cuba or human rights violations and apartheid in Israel. We just use them as other tools for our own empire. And the idea that, I may be a little bit of devil's advocate in this situation. I don't want to romanticize a state like China as if to say, here's this utopia that has been created in China. It's not. There's tons of criticisms, a laundry list. Something that's funny for me as someone who focuses on Iran is sometimes referred to as an imperialist power. What? Iran is an empire? Why? Now, here's something interesting. They'll say something like, well, Iran has a presence in Iraq, with no sense of irony that presence came in the wake of the US invasion of Iraq, right? There's no sense of irony about these things. There's no sense of irony when we have 800 bases around the world, many of those bases surrounding Iran, right? Iran has no bases in Canada. Is that right? None, right? Does Iran have bases in Mexico? Central America? No. So the idea that these states are a threat to the US is not that they're actually a threat to the US. It's that they even entertain the idea of being independent of the US. So if you're independent of the US, if the US can't control you, you're a threat to its empire and its control, not to the United States' power. There is arguably no entity in human history that has had the power and reach of the United States in its current iteration. The United States, as of right now, has reached every single place in the world. And so when you compare this idea that these are competing empires, it's ludicrous. And the example that Peter gave was sanctions. What other country can sanction millions of people into poverty? None. No other country. I'll give you an example using Iran. When the United States under Trump quit the Iran nuclear deal, okay? Every other party was still in the agreement. But the US sanctions were so powerful that Europe could do nothing. Europe could not overcome US sanctions and secondary sanctions. That's the power of the US economy. That's the power of US empire. That no one can do anything once those sanctions are in place. So the idea of comparing them is probably what I find most problematic. And none of that is to say, and that's why I said at the beginning, none of that is to say that these states are not in and of themselves problematic. They are, but it's a joke to compare them in terms of power. They are not comparable powers. And our issue is not violations of sovereignty. Our issue is not human rights. Our issue is not democracy. Our issue is anything that can be independent of our reach and our power. And that's the threat that China poses. China poses an actual viable threat to being independent of the United States and its economy.
Yeah. So some very, very good points, Assal. I totally 100% agree with you. And I think, and you're right. Like, I don't think there's any government in the world that is that we can say, okay, this is Valhalla, utopia. They're perfect. Every government has their serious issues of human rights abuses. But I think I would like to add, not only is China a competitor to the United States, well, actually, I would like to broaden this idea. China is a competitor to U.S. empire also in the sense that it's a competitor, it's an ideological competitor that threatens capital and that threatens the hegemonic position of capitalists. What I'm trying to say is, and you see that's why the U.S. has always been so afraid of socialist governments also in Latin America, is that once you see a government that elevates, whether it's indigenous people in Latin America or Afro-Brazilians in Latin America, or whether it's the poor in China that elevates people out of poverty, this is very dangerous to that hegemonic position of the top 1%, because that creates a world where you actually elevate people who were previously the lower class to be exploited. Okay, that system really threatens the fundamentals of capitalism. I think this is a very important point. That is why you see that extreme obsession in the US and also other Western countries of like socialism and Marxism and leftism, they're really, our mainstream media is just panicking when socialists get some form of power in our societies. And I think what Peter also said, a very, very important thing, is that China was very smart. The only way they could go up and so in a way escape the boot of empire is by opening up, so-called opening up, and creating this market economy. However, still maintaining that political power over its capitalists. So you have the Communist Party that rules over the capitalists in China, while in the United States you have the capitalists that rule over your political power. So that's reversed. Why is this so smart what China did? Because China opened up, especially during Deng Xiaoping. China even got praise from the West. Oh, China is becoming an open capitalist society. China was very smart because they were still controlling the capitalists. So China was growing while the empire was ignoring China in that sense. They were like, oh, yes, China is becoming one of us. In the meantime, the West was bombing the Middle East into oblivion, totally ignoring China. China was silently growing. And now they're at the point that they're so incredibly powerful that they become a serious contender of the United States. And they realize, wait a minute, they don't become capitalists like us, but it's too late. You could say it's kind of too late, you know what I mean? And and there was one comment I wanted to reply to, and I think that is something we leftists also should be very careful with, is that somebody said the only real socialist government is in Cuba. I think we cannot say that. I think we have so many different kind of iterations of socialism and leftism that there is not one perfect kind of socialism or leftism, you know, not in Cuba, not in Bolivia, not in Brazil, not in China. I think that we as socialists still have to find that socialist system that works for all of us. We're just not there yet. And I think we have to be really careful with this kind of purity discussions, like, oh no, that country is the real socialist country. You know, that's like religious people would say, like, I'm following the real Quran, I'm a real Muslim, or I'm a real Christian. You know what I mean? I think we have to watch out with that kind of purity discussion. Leftists, we need to unite, you know, and there are many different iterations of socialism. We will disagree with each other, but I don't believe that there is one real socialist country. You know what I mean? Maybe someone else wants to say something.
Yeah, well, so
I wanted to say, sorry, thank you, Nick. I just wanted to say that, so I think I spoke about that here before already, but we had the BRICS, right, for a little while, which was Russia, China, with Brazil, Russia, China, South American and India. I'm with Assad. I think, like, whenever you have, like, I think the means of control, and of course, like, I truly believe that the Cold War now is between China and the US. But I also, like, think that those two separate poles are, like, playing us like a violin. Because China behaves like as a communist socialist country in the inside, and in the outside, it's an imperialist capitalist country in the world economy. Reason why I say that is because, like, I always keep on, like, trying to compare. I don't understand properly the educational system in the US, but by my observations is it doesn't teach much of critical thinking unless you are in a specific path to it. Like, if you're studying something that goes towards it. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is that, like, I like to look at things, and, like, I think the danger that you just were talking about, Karim, is believing the need for a hero. You know, we as human beings, unfortunately, have that. We created God. We created, like, all other heroes that we had, and now we are putting that up, like, in governments and leaders of movements, and, you know. So I keep on looking at this story about the BRICS, and I haven't studied it and went, like, very deep on it, but I remember looking at it and saying, after it broke, because it's gone now, the BRICS is not a thing anymore. And I know that one of the ways that they used to break that bloc apart, was the coup d'etat that happened in Brazil. And it was in the same time where Brazil discovered pre-sal, which is an unlimited source of petroleum. And Brazil wanted to hold the royalties for the country, and coup d'etat. And then you start like breaking down the BRICS, and nowadays India, South Africa, and Brazil are in the economy is to break to pieces, like we were destroyed without a war, without an invasion. And I don't see China and Russia, like if China was really like supporting and supportive and with this interest, I did not see much of a support. I did not see. I see China not supporting Bolsonaro. I see that the relations that we had with China are not the same anymore. But I did not feel the support, because like when Cuba was with the Soviet Union was helping Cuba to face the US, right? When the revolution happened, and oh God, the president of Cuba, the leader of Cuba, Che and Fidel took over, and then they were with Soviet Union, and Soviet Union was like supporting. It was like, and I do not feel that from China. I really don't believe we polarize. What?
Fidel did say that China is like the most important country for anti-imperialism in the world today, and this was like, I think 10 years ago or so. But yeah, I mean, I think actually even the USSR didn't really support revolutionary movements around the world as much as it could have. I think it was very conservative in its foreign policy overall. I think China is also relatively conservative when it comes to supporting revolutionary movements, but it does provide essential diplomatic support. Like even it's kind of actually, to me, it seems more similar to Brazil under Lula, like domestically very much like still, following what the kind of banking and capitalist class in Brazil want, but making life better for the poorest through the Bolsa Familia. China is doing something kind of similar. They're not bucking the interests of kind of global capitalists yet. We'll see some interesting news coming out of China this year, but internationally they provide key diplomatic support, just like the Lula government did in its foreign policy. So I think there's a little similarity.